Episode 13.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Fitness Finance Podcast, your training resource for being a happy, healthy, and wealthy dad.
Hey everyone, today we have Scott Ford, founder and CEO of Cornerstone Wealth Management Group. He's on an investment committee as a technical strategist. He's also the author of 3 books, and his most recent book is The Sustainable Edge, 15 Minutes a Day for a Richer Entrepreneurial Life. And that book is written for business owners with the idea of really diving in and understanding how to have great business success, but still have great personal success. It seems like it's pretty common, and this is true in management too, that you have to have one or the other. You know, if you're really going to have a successful business, you've got to sacrifice a lot of time with your family and just sacrifice a lot of personal life. And this book is geared to figuring out, kind of how you can have both. He also wrote Financial Jiu-Jitsu, which is a guide for more of the individual on figuring out retirement and finance planning for yourself. And Scott is also a beekeeper. So I thought that was pretty curious, so we talked about that a little bit too. Well, all right. You guys know I like to jump into these things pretty quick, so let's go ahead and do it. Hey, Scott, thanks for being on.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Seth.
So, Scott, you're the CEO and founder of Cornerstone Wealth Management Group, and I fundamentally understand the idea of a wealth management group, but I've never spoken to an advisor or anything like that. So could you fill me in kind of on what Cornerstone does?
Yeah, happy to. And so you don't feel alone. Most people spend most of their life trying to avoid talking to an advisor anyway, so you're not alone. But, yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, we do proactive wealth management for typically business owners and entrepreneurs. And, the goal there is to take care. I have a 6-pillar life philosophy. So for me, the pillars I try to live by are spiritual, family, health, career, philanthropy, and finances. And I tell you that because that was the founding and where Cornerstone got its name, is we wanted to take care of that financial pillar in such a good way that other folks, specifically business owners, could focus on their pillars and what's most important to them in their life. So in that role, tax planning, estate planning, insurance planning, investment planning, we become that basically CFO, Chief Financial Officer for those business owners. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do.
And so do you play a part in the business, or are you working with usually just the individual and the profits he made from the business?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, but primarily working with the CEO and the founder of those businesses and helping them balance their life out and take some capital off the table so that it really frees them up, right? It's not just about the business then. So primarily with the CEO, and we'll help them with best business practices at times as well, because that's really at the heart of who I am as being a business owner and entrepreneur. I think they're the backbone of any economy. So it's why we, are passionate about serving them, and any way we can help them, we feel like we're helping communities and helping other people along the way. I
gotcha. What advice would you have for the average family in terms of their savings retirement? In my mind, I kind of think maybe it's max out your Roth IRA, but then, I'm not totally sure. So is that like a good plan, or what do you think?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variables there, Seth. So I would say I am a fan of Roth. I give people the analogy of a farmer, and the question I asked, would you rather pay tax on the seed, or would you rather pay tax on the crop? If I asked you that, what would you say?
The seed, of course.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? So that's really the premise of the Roth, right? You're able to, versus a regular IRA, you put that money in, you're not paying tax on the seed. But then as it grows, ideally, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, it is taxable. Where Roth, yeah, you're paying tax, but you're paying it on the seed. And then in that case, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, that growth and that money is all tax-free, thus your crop being tax-free. So to me, I like the balance. So if someone has a 401k and, can put money in there, I think, okay, let's do that. But then let's also make sure and put as much as we can in a tax-free environment like a Roth to give you some diversification tax-wise as well.
Right. What kind of percentage do you think is smart for investing of your annual income into retirement?
Yeah. So this is as much as you can. Here's what I would say. Ideally, I talk about a little bit. I had written a book years ago. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so I wrote a book called Financial Jiu-Jitsu, and the goal of that book was just to help, let's just say, the average Joe be able to have a successful retirement and put enough money away. Now, I say retirement with tongue-in-cheek a little bit because I'm not really a big believer in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you find something that you're passionate about, you don't have to retire. And to me, I'm living retirement now because retirement is doing what you want to do when you want to do it, and I live that. So that said, just helping the average Joe put money away. And so in there, we talk about basics of principles that have been around forever and will be around forever, like paying yourself first. And here's the thing. People will hear that, they'll listen to this podcast, and you know what, I already know this. Well, the question is, are you doing it? So I would say 10% paying yourself first at a minimum,
mm-hmm.
and then 10% given away somewhere, and you start that early as well. And whether that's just some form of gifting, whether it's your local community, whether it's your church, something else you're passionate about, set up your own foundation, a donor advised fund, whatever, but they would be the starting points. 10% saved. If that's an IRA or qualified, great. If it's not, just make it automatic. And that way, it's amazing how when you make things automatic, how you find ways to make that work and you don't really notice it. Mm-hmm. If you don't, that money has a place and finds a place to go, right? If it gets in your hands or in your account, it's funny how we can find a way to spend it. Whereas if it's taken out automatically, you never miss it.
Yeah, I do an automatic contribution into a retirement account, and it's always kind of funny. I don't check it that much because I try not to be honest, but you know, every 3 or 6 months I'll look at it, and I'm always surprised every time at how much money. I'm like, oh, that's fun. Like that's more money than I thought was going to be there. And yeah,
that's the game right there, Seth. Is that when that becomes fun, that's like a mind shift. When it becomes more fun to do that and to see that account grow than it does to spend, you're on the right track.
Yeah. So how about the beginning of Cornerstone? Were you just working somewhere else? Like, what made you go out on a limb and start Cornerstone back in, I think it was 96?
Yeah, it was, exactly. And so for me, two things happened in life. And so I've always really been an entrepreneur. And I didn't know it back then, but I look back and see that's the case. And I've never worked for anyone my entire life. So as an example, two things. One, growing up, Dad used to, multiple times I can remember him saying that small business owners are the backbone of any economy, and that stuck with me. And the second thing that happened, I started doing magic in middle school, and actually to the point where I started doing birthday parties. So in middle school, I was doing magic shows for little kids in this case, and my parents, one of them would take me to the birthday party, and I charged $50 for this show, for an hour show. Ended up with doves and got a rabbit and the whole apparatus. I would do this show. Mom and Dad would either wait or they'd come back and get me and haul me back. And so I look back at that and laugh, but I've always done that. And then out of school, I started working in insurance and benefits planning for small business owners. And that led me to just seeing what good people, hard workers they were, yet they weren't great most times with their finances, and a lot of it was because they didn't really have time to focus on it. They were busy running their business. And so I was handling a piece, their benefits package and insurance. I thought, you know what, really someone should fill this gap to help them with quarterback and CFO, their tax planning, estate planning, insurance planning, investments, all in one place. And so that's what led me, that was the energy that had me start Cornerstone in 1996 for that very reason, to fill that gap.
Yeah, and I've seen, even recently, you wrote your third book, The Sustainable Edge, 15 Minutes a Week to a Richer Entrepreneurial Life. Is that, I see it's pretty popular. I saw there were 69 reviews on Amazon at 5 stars. It looks like it's geared towards the businessman, right? 15 minutes to give him a better kind of life in his business.
It totally is. Yeah, it's definitely written for business owners and entrepreneurs, Seth. And again, that's who I feel like I'm born to serve, and that's who I am. And so wrote that book with my partner, Ron, and the reason we wrote it is because we both have lived both sides of this thing. And what I mean by that is early on, it was all about work. And I just spent so many hours, and, there were some sacrifices to do that. And some of the areas that sacrifice in those times can be health and family and spiritual and other areas that were important to me. And then for years, while kids were young, my hours weren't as much. I really had more of a lifestyle practice and made sure I took them to school. I picked them up, and I don't regret any of that. But yet the business at time wasn't growing like it should have. And Ron and I both went through this, and for years now, we both feel like we are living the sustainable edge. And what the sustainable edge is, we're believers that balance leads to growth, and growth leads to balance, and that you truly can have it all with that done properly. And that's exactly what the book is written about, and who it's written to is certainly business owners who I've struggled with it, and I know a lot of business owners struggle with that very thing.
I didn't read it at first when I saw it, but I guess the alternate is the ragged edge, right, where you're running ragged. It seems like that's what most entrepreneurs and even a lot of people in salary type positions, managers, are just working themselves right down to the bone.
Absolutely. Yes, that's very accurate. And look, when you look at, so I gave the 6 pillars earlier, right? And so those have not changed. I developed those back in 95. My son at that time was 6 months old and had a heart issue, which they did surgery. He's completely fine. He's 22, will be 22 this August, so very healthy and in great shape. That said, it made me really reflect, and that's when I developed really my 6 pillars of my value system. That's never changed. Having said that, if I look back at my calendar through many years and many periods, though they were my values, I clearly was not living them. Mm-hmm. Because I say they're my priorities, and they are, but what gets on your calendar are really what your priorities are. And so I look back, and it was like work. That was my priority. So yeah, that's one of my 6 pillars, my career, but clearly other areas and my other values were suffering. That's not the case now, and it's not been that way for years. When I look at my calendar, it's very balanced among those. And look, people argue there's no such thing as balance, and I would, for the most part, agree with that. What I'm saying is you can see what's getting out of balance. So in other words, it's never perfectly balanced, but I can definitely tell you, I look at my calendar weeks now compared to 10, 15 years ago, and I'm definitely living a balanced, fulfilled life in comparison, and just even overall.
I've seen that in myself and some coworkers as well, where we have a big discrepancy between our claimed priorities, what we would write down that our priorities are, and then where we invest our time, which is what our actual priorities are. And there can be a huge discrepancy there, and we don't even see it somehow. I don't know how it really happens, and I've done it myself.
Yes.
Now I'm kind of doing the same thing where I'm scheduling time with family, scheduling work time. I'm trying to actually make my calendar look and my time investment look like what I would claim my priorities are.
Yes, that's it. That's it. So actually we're building a tool for that. We're building a calendar or a planner, right, for your mm-hmm. year and for your weeks, just for this very purpose. So I've not found one exactly like I would want it, but we've started it anyway. So we have a 1-page document called the IQ Grower, and that if you look at the book, it's in the book. And IQ in this case stands for Implementation Quotient. And the idea here is when it's all said and done, there's a lot more said than is actually done. So we wanted to help there. So this IQ Grower, which, by the way, you can download for free, your listeners can, on our website, is a PDF document, helps you identify your values, what's most important to you, and then what your goals are there. And then it brings it down to this week. What are the areas that you need to focus on based on your values? So this is part of that 15-minute a week to a richer entrepreneurial life. to get these things on your calendar, and then we prioritize what are the 6 most important and the vital one this week and tomorrow for you to accomplish in order of priority.
That sounds neat. I'll have to link to that. Maybe you have some insight on this because it sounds like you've worked to the ragged edge and been an entrepreneur a long time. But sometimes as dads, we think the best thing for our families is that we stay at work longer, and that's like our sign that we care. I love my family so much I stayed late tonight. It's kind of how our brains think sometimes, but I don't think that's right at all. But I don't know how we get triggered into that. Have you seen that in yourself or other people?
Totally, yes, and both is right. So I can look back, and definitely the driver for a lot of what I've done work-wise has been family. Yet, at times you're burning the candle at both ends, and you're not as present. And even if you're there, whether it's events with kids, talking to kids, it's easy to not really be there.
Yeah. Right?
You're at an event, but you're thinking about work, and then you're at work and you're thinking, gosh, I should spend more time with my kids and family. So you're not ending up being very effective or present either place, right? Mm-hmm. So getting clear on that and scheduling the time to really be there without the guilt either way is really that sustainable edge we're talking about. So when you're with your family, be there. Right, and be present. And when you're at work, right? Be present there and be engaged. And just having it outlined of what your days and what the priorities are in advance, I think is really helpful to do that.
So bouncing over, I guess to your other book, to summarize, if we're interested in maybe retirement or growing wealth in general, it sounds like Financial Jiu-Jitsu is the book for us. Is that right? And then
it is exactly right. Yep, that's more written for financial planning and investing. Absolutely, and of course, there's lots of papers I've put that I write on our site as well. But the book would be Financial Jiu-Jitsu for that. Absolutely.
And then, obviously, if we're on the ragged edge, looking for a little more balance and trying to figure out family and life, we'll get the sustainable edge. What would you say to the listeners? Kind of what criteria or how would someone know it's time for them to talk to an advisor at Cornerstone?
Yeah, so typically, here's what I would say. So if you're looking for an advisor, the first thing I would look for is a fiduciary. Right? What's that mean? Well, someone gave an analogy of if you're going to go on a diet, who do you talk to? Well, you could talk to a butcher and you could talk to a dietitian. Right? What's the difference? Well, if you're on a diet or you're just trying to watch what you're eating for health reasons, you go to a butcher, what do you think they're going to recommend? It's going to be a steak, pretty sure, right?
Yeah.
It may be Kobe, it may be something that's exotic, it may be something lean and very healthy, honestly. But look, he sells meat, or she does, right? So they're going to recommend the steak for dinner. A dietitian, on the other hand, is going to want to know your data, your goals, what are you trying to accomplish, what is your weight, what's your cholesterol. They're going to want to get this data and then put together a plan based on your goals, objectives, and knowing all that data, right? And it may be steak, but it may be a steak salad, it may be chicken, salmon, it may be whatever fits based on your needs, goals, and objectives. That difference is typically brokers are more like butchers and fiduciaries more like dietitians. So I just stress, whoever your listeners go to, look for a fiduciary. That way they're sitting on the same side of the table and they're going to get that advice like a dietitian's going to give them advice, right?
Gotcha.
When do you do it? Well, some people may want to do it themselves, and there's technology out there that can help them do that, right? The biggest challenge that do-it-yourselfers are going to have is emotion. Whether it's planning or whether it's investing, that's our own biggest enemy. So just like me, right? I can work out on my own and sometimes do. There's other times a trainer makes sense because they can see things I can't see. It could push me harder and help me. Same with working on my house. And there's some areas I'm a do-it-yourselfer. Wife and I just built a house. I actually built the kitchen cabinets. I enjoy doing woodworking.
Awesome.
There's other portions that it just doesn't make sense. It's not a good use of my time. It's not necessarily my skill set. So that's when I'm going to look for a professional. So that's what I would tell your listeners to do. Is it something they enjoy and that they're passionate about? They should go it on their own then. There's planning software to help with that. There's investment platforms out there to help. If they're not, or they need a second opinion, or they need to keep their emotions in check, that's when you want to start looking for a fiduciary, have that conversation, and start that interview process.
Gotcha. I just dabbled in the stock market, really just more for self-education, and I figured out pretty quick that I didn't enjoy it, and it wasn't for me because even though actually I was doing pretty well, but, I was just checking it, I think, twice a day, and, kind of like you said, the emotional thing, it just was a real hassle for me, and I didn't enjoy it, so I was like, I'll wipe my hands of this, I'm going to let someone else handle this, and I'm going to, go do something else.
Yeah, and that's not unusual, and that's a good lesson to learn, right? And,
yeah.
For a lot of people, I think that's the case. They'd be better off delegating to someone who's competent and look at that, what you're paying them as an investment, right? And it's the same as a business owner when you look at your team. Are they an expense or are they an investment? They're an investment. They're not an expense. So you can make a bad investment, right? So you need to free that person up. But for the most part, look at the planner and the fiduciary as an investment, just like as a business owner, you would look at your team members and stakeholders internally as investments.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at your bio, Scott, and I see a lot of stuff on here. I feel like I'm kind of the same way. I'm a jack of all trades, but I see beekeeping on here. Do you do beekeeping?
I do. We got into this about 4 years ago now, and wow, what a fascinating journey that has been. This actually, my wife was interested. We found a guy, so we moved and built a place in Hedgesville, West Virginia. And before we did, we purchased this ground about 4 years ago, 3.5, something like that. And it was about the same time we looked into getting bees, and she actually looked into it. I'm thinking, have at it, I'll go along. But my interest level was not too high. I'm just thinking about getting stung. That was about how much I knew about bees.
Yeah.
But I get to this class and just how fascinating these creatures are and how important they are. Right? I think it's almost 2/3 of every bite you take comes from a bee pollinating something.
Wow.
I think it was Einstein that said, without bees, in 2 years, we're all done.
Yeah.
So what a fascinating creature. And so, yeah, we keep bees. I do have lots of hobbies. That's one of them. And honestly, just like that can teach you about life. They can teach you about business. There's a lot to learn. We've had a lot of fun with them, and not to mention plenty of honey, which has been delicious. That's kind of been the cherry on top.
So with beekeeping as a hobby, do you own the little, I don't even know what you call them, little squares, wooden squares of bees, or does someone else come do it for you, or how does that work?
No, you could. We have some land, and so we could, rent it out. Let's just call it where you have beekeepers coming in to keep their bees. But nope, we actually have our own hives. So we have our own frames that are inside the hive boxes, and that's our equipment. And so we work the bees about every week, or at least every other week, and in the exception of winter, so you check on them maybe once a month then, and it's our stuff. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. That said, I will say it's work. There's work to it. There's no two ways about it. But if you like it, it's a labor of love.
That's pretty neat. Me and my wife want to move out to some more acreage, and beekeeping actually crossed my mind, not because I have an interest in it per se right now, but just to kind of do my part, because I've read, and is this all accurate, that bees are going away or something, that bees are just dying in mass for no reason? And have you heard of that? I think I read that in a magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a little backstory on that. So one of the goals we had in moving, one, we could build something we've always wanted, which was our dream home. We both always wanted a log home, and then that transformed into a timber frame, and that's exactly what we built. And so love it there. And part of the goal was to live off the land a little bit, and we're actually living off the land a lot. So bees tie into all of that. So I hunt. I'm an avid hunter, primarily archery, but age all my own game. So mostly we consume venison from our land. We have a permaculture type setup. Not sure how familiar you are with permaculture as far as that goes, but we're working on that. So a lot of our, let's call it plants, what most people would consider. We not only have a garden, but most people, when you're planting something, it's to look pretty. Well, we want it to look pretty, but we also want it to produce. So it's nuts and berries and elderberries, and being able to, again, a lot of our diet be part of what we can consume there. And honeys play a part of that, right? Because then they pollinate all of these plants. They produce honey, and so that was the overall picture. What I would say is it is work. And I know what people who are much more experienced in it than I am, that they've shared with me is get into it and take a class and look into it. Then if you catch the bug and you're passionate about it, go for it. But normally they'll say, don't just get Beehive to help, even though ultimately it does, because it doesn't help if you lose the hive, right? Because someone else maybe could. So that's been their advice. But lots of fun. Lots of meaning, and gosh, for me, there's something about being connected to what you consume. Mm-hmm. So that's been my case with hunting. Like, no one processes my game because I feel like, number one, I owe it to the animal, but two, I'm involved in the entire process down to cooking it and then consuming it. And gosh, it's healthy, tastes better. Same with the garden. And it's been the same with the honey and the bees. We're really connected to that food we're consuming. And I think that's a lost art or area, certainly for our culture, that I'm excited to get back to a little bit.
Yeah, that's really neat. I've got a little bit of that. We don't have a big piece of land right now, so we've just got a small blueberry and tomatoes and strawberries garden. But we're wanting to grow, so I'll catch up to you here in a little bit.
have at it and surpass me. That's what it's about. That's fun, but yeah, we're enjoying this journey. I'll say that.
That's awesome. Well, Scott, thanks so much for your time. I enjoyed learning about your group and your books. And yeah, is there anything else that we need to cover while we're on the phone?
That's it. I would say for that sheet, people can go to thesustainableedge.com, thesustainableedge.com, and that's the website of the book, and you'll see the PDF document on there that they can download called the IQ Grower Process. So your listeners are welcome to that. Have at it. Confident it'll help them. And yeah, if I can be of help, appreciate the time that you had me on, Seth. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. Have a good day.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, that is a wrap with Scott. So I want you to know one thing real quick is it wasn't Scott and I's goal today to get really deep on investment strategy. And that's something I'd like to talk about in the future. But with Scott being our first actual professional wealth manager on the episode, I more wanted to lay down foundation for this topic for the future. In the future, I'd like to do an episode that are maybe the 5 first steps you should do for retirement savings or something along that lines to really lay it out. But today I just wanted to lay down that foundation. We did touch on a Roth IRA, which in my research has been pretty, I would say fairly universally recommended as your first step in retirement because of the heavy tax advantages. And so even other things might get better returns, but you'll likely get hit harder on taxes because you made all this money and then you're getting taxed. There's one risk I've thought about with a Roth IRA is that tax law could change. So that's one risk I've considered, but you can't really plan for that. The Roth contribution limit for 2017 is $5,500, and if you're over 50, it's $6,500. And it's worth noting that if you start making above a certain amount, that you're limited to how much you can contribute. So I think that's interesting. I think that's the tax system acknowledging that like this is a pretty good deal, right? So for the links that Scott mentioned, I'll put links in the show notes on fatherhoodfitnessfinance.com. Also, I had a good idea. I'd like to give a couple shout outs on my Instagram account. I thought it'd be kind of fun to see where you guys listen to your podcast. For me, I listen to usually when I'm mowing the grass. I'll put some earmuffs over my ears with my headphones inside the earmuffs, and it works out pretty well. But yeah, if you could tag me on Fatherhood Fitness Finance, and I think it'd be kind of fun to see where you listen, and hopefully it's something kind of weird or kooky, just because that'd be a lot of fun. I've got a decent amount of followers, like 12,000. So if you have a small business account or something, maybe we can help give you some exposure on Instagram. Well, all right. I think that's a wrap on this episode. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Fatherhood Fitness Finance Podcast. You can find us at fatherhoodfitnessfinance.com.